Welcome to the Bookman Show. I'm your host, James Renford Powell. And of course, this is the show where we talk about the what, who, where, when, why, and how you can get your book into print. And we do that by talking to people who've been there and done that. Authors. I've been, I guess, for the most part, with a few being experts in a particular book. And our guest today is Dr. Elle McDonald, originally from Conway, Arkansas.
That's right.
And her book, we'll be talking about it and all of her trials and tribulations when it comes to putting it into print. This is her book, Are You Too Emotional, or Are You Emotional Enough? Tell us a little bit about this book, how you came to be doing this.
Well, it's a very interesting story. I was raised in a pretty conventional, dysfunctional family. And my family's dynamic was such that I never felt quite that I belonged. And so, having felt that way most of my life, when I got old enough, I left home and started journeying around the world in search of where I did belong. So this book came about through a series of journeys, my own illness, and my own salvation, I guess you could say, into working with my own self after I'd been to numerous doctors, numerous psychologists, and they were not able to help me. So this is a culmination of those experiences and the way I found through my own illness to become healthy and whole again.
So the book is kind of a record of your path to the present? Or?
Yes, in a way. It's also based on quantum physics. It's based on Newtonian physics. At the time I wrote it, some of the symptoms I was having, they didn't have names for them. They do now, but at the time I wrote it, they didn't. So my information was quite cutting edge at the time, and after I published this book, I had people bring it back to me and say, I don't understand this, and give it back to me, and I would say, well, okay. So I realized after a number of years that the information that I had and what I had discovered was actually to come. So the information in the book now is mainstream information, where when I first wrote it, it was too new for a lot of people to understand.
Now you went through, because of your illness, you ended up going to Africa.
I did.
And not to the big city, but to the bush.
To the bush, that's right.
And working with a shaman there.
I worked with what they call, their name for shaman is Sangoma, which means the one who rides the drum. I had exhausted all my avenues of treatment in the Western culture, and I just knew there was a way through this. I wasn't born this way. I was born a healthy child, and I had accumulated, now looking back on it, a lot of stress in my nervous system. And as I journeyed into the different cultures, and I had also sought many, many alternative treatments.
Here in the States.
Here in the States, including hypnotherapy, massage, Reiki, various treatments that would work temporarily but would not give me permanent relief for what I was suffering from, which is intense chronic fatigue and Epstein-Barr and fibromyalgia. Back then they didn't have names for those things, but now they do. So what ended up happening is I had kind of given up on my life and thought, wow, I can't live like this. I feel so bad. A friend of mine, I had gone to South Africa on a holiday just to get out of the country and try to relax. And while I was down there, I met a Sangoma, which is a shaman. And he read the bones for me. And the bones is a divination system that the Africans use. It's a series of objects and bones that they throw, and then they can read them and tell you what's...
Sort of like the runes?
It's a little bit like the runes.
Except they don't have writing on them, I guess.
They don't. They're just little objects, like the shell, like there's shells in them, and how they fall and the patterns, the Shangomas are able to read them. So I went to see him, and he rolled the bones, and when he rolled them out, one of the bones jumped in my lap, and he started laughing, and I said, "Why are you laughing?" He did speak English. And he said, "Well, you've got the sickness of calling." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, you need to train as a Sangoma. You need to train as a shaman for you to get over this illness. Your ancestors have given you a place here on earth to help other people." And I said, "Well, what does that entail?" And he said, "Well, you've got to go to the bush, you've got to live in a mud hut, and you have to work with my brother." I said, I'm not going to do that. And so I came back to the States. Well, as when I came back to the States, I started having dreams. I broke out in rashes. My back started hurting. More and more symptoms came. I called my friend back in Africa and said, I think I'm dying. He said, "Come over, I'll take you, we'll go do that. I'll help you do it." So I flew back to South Africa, went to the bush, lived in a mud hut, did all the things they told me to do, and then I was better.
Well, it sounds a little bit like Jonah being told in the Bible to go, and he refused to go, and he gets into all kinds of trouble. So it got worse because he refused to go.
That's right. It got worse, and only till I agreed to do it did it come right.
Now, this wasn't a little 3-month, 6-month tour either.
No, I ended up staying in South Africa for about 15 years. And while I was over there, I practiced full on in a practice as a Sangoma. I had my little hut, and I threw the bones for people. And every day while I was studying to be a Sangoma, we went out to the bush and collected muti, which is medicine, plant herbs and things like that. And they were for specific things that people suffered from in that culture. I don't think it would work over here because we suffer from different things over here, but over there it worked very nicely.
Well, that must have been a real novelty for the locals to be coming to see this blonde-haired American lady as a Sangoma.
It was really interesting. They actually came from all over to see me dance. One of the big things that we learned to do was dance the ancestors. That's where they come in and they, what they call ride you. And it's not like being possessed, but their energy comes in and you're given this incredible energy to be able to dance for hours at a time. But their big thing was to be able to watch the white woman dance.
Well, with the drums too, that creates an energy.
Absolutely. The drums were amazing. The minute there's a certain rhythm that we got conditioned to, the minute you hear them, you feel your energy shift and you're able to just dance and dance and dance.
And this is not really a religion, is it?
No, it's not a religion, although the people over there do use it to guide their lives. It's called the African healing tradition. And in this culture, we call them witch doctors, but it's not actually a witch doctor, it's a doctor of witches. So the negative energy is actually counteracted by the Sangomas. So that's how that works.
What else did you do in that for 15 years?
I wasn't in training for 15 years. I was in training for about 2 years. And when I came out of the training and set up my practice, I did that for a while. And then I realized that I needed to come back to the States. My mother had become ill and that sort of thing. But once I got over here, I could not figure out how to integrate what I'd learned or what I'd done.
That was my next question. How did you integrate
in that culture? I couldn't figure out how to work with it over here. So I stopped dancing and I stopped chanting and calling the ancestors. It just wasn't accepted over here. And
what about your health when you stopped doing that?
well, I started getting full of pain again, and I started not feeling well and that sort of thing. And then I discovered Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini Yoga, we use breath, we use sound, we use chanting, we use movement, and then I started feeling better again.
So it's almost the same effects, but a little different mechanical.
Well,
system.
this is what the conclusion I've come to through my own experience and working with many other people. In all the indigenous cultures I've visited, and I've visited a few of them, Tibet, India, Africa, Australia, they all use sound, breath, and movement to go into their trances and to heal themselves. And that's the basis of the yoga that I teach now.
Now, you utilized an eye movement portion initially until you develop further, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the eyes, now this is only after in hindsight. At the time, I was just going along because I didn't understand myself because of my illness. But in hindsight, the eyes are extensions of the brain. It's the same material. And the nerve, the eye nerve, the ocular nerve, runs right back into the base brain. So as we're dancing and breathing, we're moving our eyes around, we're blinking our eyes, and this releases stress. Also, making sound releases stress. The auditory nerve also runs back in that back brain, which is our survival brain, our base brain, and that releases stress. And then the breathing also releases stress. So basically what I realized after many years is I was releasing deep stress in my nervous system.
So when someone is frightened and they scream, they're really releasing stress?
Absolutely. There's three main things that we're born with, and it's fight, flight, or freeze. Most of us, when we're children and our parents get on us or we get in trouble, we get angry. That's our first response. The second response, when we realize they're a lot bigger than us and have control over our lives, is we want to run away. That's why a lot of people run away from home. Then when we realize we don't have anywhere to go, we freeze. So most of us are trapped in the freeze response of our base brain.
And if you're trapped in the frozen part, then that runs the stress up real high.
That runs it up. There's no release, and that's why a lot of our culture now is suffering so much from these immune problems, depression, heart attacks, high blood pressure. That's from being trapped in the nervous system, being trapped in these freeze situations.
Now, we've had people on the show who have talked about steps to enlightenment and so forth. Mm-hmm. And one of the key things that they talk about is getting rid of garbage or getting rid of the baggage that you're carrying. Now, I assume that what you do has something to do with this process, too.
Well, the garbage or baggage that we're carrying is what we've accumulated in our nervous system. Our nervous system accumulates stress, and if we don't take downtime and we don't take pleasure in our lives and we don't express ourselves, or we're socially feel trapped, this accumulates in our system. Let me back up just a little bit. When we're conceived, there's a sperm and an egg. That sperm and egg come together and it forms what we call a neural tube. Out of that neural tube, our nervous system, our brain grows, every organ, every cell of our body comes out of this neural tube. So when we're in the womb and our mother is eating something, our nervous system is picking it up. If our mother gets upset, our nervous system picks it up. So we come into the world, our birth trauma it used to be they used to hit kids and make them cry and all that. Now I think it's a little different, and they lay them on the tummy, and there's all this nurturing going on. But in my generation, they used forceps. There was lots of things that happened to a child, and because we're now evolving to a kinder way to treat children, the children that are being born now are not so traumatized when they come into the world. So their nervous systems are different than the ones when we were born. Anyway, the nervous system accumulates these memories way precognitive and premotor. So this stress stays there until at some point we can acknowledge that we got trapped in our reflexes, say when we're learning to walk. We could have had trauma when we're falling. Now, none of this is intentional, but looking back on our lives, we can see where we accumulated a lot of stress and it didn't get released.
You as I see from what I've read and so forth, you've taken a very scientific approach to this. One would think, okay, voodoo, hoodoo from Africa, and she's come with all this mumbo jumbo. But in fact, your whole approach is really rather opposite of that. Tell us about that.
Yes, I felt I needed to go into the unknown to come back to the known again. I started out in a very conventional educational system, grade school, high school, college, graduate, postgraduate. And then I got sick. So it's like, okay, what's wrong with this picture? So I had to allow myself to step into the unknown, into places that other people wouldn't go. And I was so sick I didn't care. I was ready to die because my life was so miserable. I was just physically miserable. But I was young, and I couldn't understand why I felt bad and why my life wasn't going along. I'd done the right things. I'd gone to church. I'd, done all the right stuff, and I felt horrible. So I said, okay, let's back up. And I'm just kind of following along my intuition, and I thought, I've gone to all the Western medicines. I've done the Eastern studies. I've done the religious thing. None of it seems to be working. So I thought, okay, let's try something different. And only till I had come back, gotten really, really ill, and gone back into the unknown, something that I wasn't used to or conditioned in, did I start getting better. And that allowed me to release a lot of stress that had been stored in my body.
Now that all took place during the 2 years of training?
That took place, and it wasn't pleasant, believe me, because what's in there's got to come out, right? So you have to kind of not relive, but it's not about re-traumatizing yourself, but it's about allowing the nervous system to relax and to move forward in a new way. See, the brain and the nervous system has this pattern of healing. It like goes in a cycle. So let's just say we're traumatized. We have a car wreck, and we're upset about this car wreck. And then as we go along 2 or 3 years down the road, we almost have another car wreck. Well, the brain will go back to that original car wreck, and it will redo that event where it comes out with a different outcome. That blueprint keeps going on our entire lives. So every time our mind redoes something, we release stress. Now, we can do this intentionally, or we can let life do it. Most people go along so unconscious that their lives are over before they ever start releasing the stress. This is some of the reasons that our lives are so short. We've accumulated so much stress, and it suppresses our immune system, it depresses our nervous system, our cardiovascular system, all of that. Because all of that is interconnected, which takes us back to this original idea of the Cartesian split that we all have been functioning under, which is very linear. It's very structured. If we have a heart problem, we go to a cardiologist. If we have a digestive problem, we go to an endocrinologist or whatever. But the point being is that we're one system. We are one quantum system. And one of the first contacts with our life is our eyes. And when we walk into an environment, the first thing we do is look around. So our eyes are the first place that stress can enter. That's why the eyes are so important when we're working with this kind of system.
And you, in your book, on page 3, so very early in the book, you draw a comparison between the Cartesian viewpoint and the quantum viewpoint. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, or
Sure.
do you feel like you've covered that enough?
Well, I feel like I've covered it. But we've all been conditioned way back from the Middle Ages or even before that things run in straight lines. Our institutions, our governments, our socio-political systems are all cause and effect kind of things. Well, in the quantum system, you can't be in a situation and observe a situation without affecting it. So things have come into play that we didn't have back in the 90s or the early 2000s, the string theory, the way we look at the galaxy, the planets, the magnetics of the Earth. All of that affects us, our weather patterns. We're all an interconnected system. Our bodies being the first experience that we have about this system. If we have a thought, our immune system hears it. If we hear something, a noise that maybe doesn't sit well with us, our body hears that. We have a physical response. If we think about our big toe knows it. The cells, all the cells in our body are alive, and they each have a consciousness, and they each take on whatever it is that's going on within us and outside of us. We're always giving information and getting information from our environment.
And it's the mind that picks up on the sensations, or?
Well, the mind is different than the brain. We have our individual brain, and then we have our universal mind, and then we have our own mind. So the mind is like, I would say, the mind exists without us. The universal mind exists without us. But we can't have the mind without our brains. Does that make sense?
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, they've come up with this new thing. Remember, they were telling us when we were kids that we were only born with 30 billion brain cells, and they each died, and we had to be careful. If we drank alcohol or smoked cigarettes, they were going to die. Well, now, through research, they know we have neuroplasticity. The glia cells, the neurons of the brain are constantly changing and growing. And so we can grow our nervous system.
You know, some Chinese foods, like they say, don't eat that because it's got sodium glutamate or something like that that kills brain cells.
Right.
That's not really true.
Well, we are magnificent systems of living cells, and though there are yogis that can drink poison and it doesn't bother them, but they have a consciousness. Their minds are such, their consciousness can process all of these things out of their system. So we have a magnificent system that can handle tremendous amounts of things that aren't good for us, unless it gets overwhelmed. When it gets overwhelmed, or we freeze, or we go into fight or flight, that's when we get in trouble.
Some teachers talk about the sensations being picked up by the mind, but the mind being picked up by our consciousness. How do you see consciousness in connection with the universal mind, the brain, and your personal mind?
Wow, that's a good question. Now, this is my interpretation of all that. Consciousness exists. period. Whether we're here or not, there's consciousness. When we're born, our nervous system is like an antenna. And so we tap into the consciousness. Our brains become conditioned. And then our own consciousness surrounds our brain and our entire body, not just the nervous system. I see our bodies as our unconscious, that we manifest our unconscious through consciousness. And the more we work with our mind-body system, the more conscious we become. In other words, the more we engage in the larger consciousness.
We're going to come back in a few moments and talk further with Dr. Elle McDonald, and we'll be maybe going back and looking at this dark night of the soul period that you went through there. This is all very interesting. We'll be back in just a few moments on the Bookman Show. My name is James Renford Powell. I'm your host. Welcome back to the Bookman Show. My guest today is Dr. Elle McDonald, and we'll be talking with her in just a few moments more, taking up from where we left off in the previous 30-minute session. I want to remind you, and I want to invite you to go to youtube.com, type in Renford Broadcast Network, that's R-E-N-F-O-R-D, Renford Broadcast Network. And there you can also view the Bookman Show. You can view the Laws of Material Wealth Personal Development Program First DVD. You can view the Core Concepts lectures. This is where we have religious leaders from a wide spectrum tell us what they believe, why they believe it, and what they're doing about it. We also have the Theater Center, where you can hook up with certain shows that you might want to see, have heard about, but don't know how to get a hold of them. And also audio books and music with meaning. So I want to invite you to do that. I want to invite you also to go to www.iam-cor.org. That's iam-cor.org, and view the virtual campus of the Institute of Applied Metaphysics, one of the sponsors of this show. The virtual campus includes the 3 degree levels of study. It includes free material that you can download. There are 3 ebooks that you can download there. You can also get a copy of the Lightways e-zine free to download. So I want to invite you to do that. If you are thinking about writing a book, even if it's a gleam in your eye, then go to the I Am Press section of this site and download the author package. And you can see how we work with authors through 3 phases. First, to put you in the position of making informed decisions, and then the actual production of the book, and then thirdly, how to market and distribute that book. So I want to invite you to do those 3 things. And also, don't forget about blogtalkradio.com. This is the Radio by Renford Network on Blog Talk Radio. Just type in www.blogtalkradio.com/Renford, and you can view shows going back 4 years. All right. And there'll be a number of the people that we've had on this show and on Core Concepts that have also been interviewed by the 10 different hosts that are on the Radio by Renford Network. So I want to invite you to visit these sites. Now back to our guest, Dr. Elle McDonald. We've been covering a wide area here, but I want to just go back before we get started further on some of this to that seeming dark night of the soul, that 2 years of training there. Was this something that you had to almost do on your own, or did the Sangoma work with you during that 2 years?
We lived, and I say we because there was 3 of us. There was a man from Switzerland, another woman who was from Ethiopia, and me. And we lived in a compound that was specially built for training Sangomas. There were 3 mud huts, and we lived in the middle one. And he was called the Baba. Baba means father, and we were his children. So he literally took us back, and there were ceremonies that represented being birthed, growing up, learning to walk. We were literally reborn again during this time. One of the first ceremonies that I remember, all the people from all over the different communities came, and there was special drumming. And we were placed in this mud hut in the dark under blankets. And it was like the symbolism of being in the womb, dark, hot. And these drums were playing around us, and I was so scared. I thought I was going to die before they ever let me. In fact, I would go down. I was under the blanket, and I would pick up the bottom of the blanket just so I could breathe. The air was so thick. And then once we're out, that's when you start growing. That was like conception, and then the symbolism of being born, and then being able to dance. Everything's symbolic, but it represents conception, being in the womb, being birthed, and then growing up with a loving Baba. And there were mamas too that came and would cook for us and things like that. But we were children for that period of time.
And do you teach any of your students today the dance?
Well, I definitely believe in movement and dancing. In all the cultures that I've been in, stamping the feet are very important because that sends vibrations up the nervous system and helps you breathe, and that helps clear out stress. Most everything I do now, I do under the umbrella of yoga. And I've developed my own yoga. It's called Stress Ace Yoga. And we use sound, we use breath, and we use movement. And so I wouldn't call it dancing, but it does incorporate all the things that I've learned and all the things that I know, including the eyes, including sound, including touch, all the senses to help release stress, because we're constantly taking in information through our senses. And when we get under stress, our senses shut down. You don't hear as well, you don't see as well, you don't digest as well. And once you give the body a chance, the body's highly intelligent on its own, even without our interference, so to speak. And when it recognizes that it's safe, it's loved and cared for, it will let go of these survival mechanisms that we're born with. And a lot of us were born into situations that maybe wasn't the best for us, but we did the best we could with it. But now that we know these things and science has given us this new research, we can actually be reborn ourselves physically through working with this stress release.
Now, you're leaving that nurturing for that 2 years, and then you were practicing for, I guess, 13.
Well, a couple of years. Yeah.
And but you were there a total of 15.
Yes.
And then you come back into the United States and you go completely to the other end of the spectrum and take a very scientific approach. How did that come about?
Well, I'd already had the scientific approach with my education and conditioning, and society doesn't let us veer here too much off the scientific approach. So I was trying to figure out how to get all this information, sensations, experience to fit into that paradigm. They're two completely, the Western mind, the African mind, the Eastern mind, they're all different kinds of minds. And when I say minds, I mean they process things differently. So
it's not just the culture.
Well, the culture is a huge reason we have different minds, but it doesn't mean that we don't operate under one mind. So each segment has something to contribute to the whole. Each cell in our body has something to contribute to our full functioning as human beings. We were not meant, I don't think we were meant to be separate. I think we were meant to function on the earth in a cooperative, pleasant way that helps everyone.
A holistic approach.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
we're far from it, as you know. Far, far from it.
Right.
But this is a little key to help us move toward that more cooperative paradigm.
Did you go for your doctorate when you came back, or is that something you had before you went?
No, I had that before I went. Yeah, I didn't.
So that was a real shockaroo to go back to the grassroots there in the bush.
That's right.
From there.
I had to let go of a lot of conditioning, and didn't want to do it. But it was either that or die. I didn't know, or suffer. I didn't know any other. What the universe, the universal mind, had put in front of me was like, here's your choices, you know. And perhaps looking back on it now, I was being guided in a way that is not so conventional, but the information that I gathered for the Western culture, which is a very segmented culture in regards to the whole world, to help, you know, open that up a bit more. Not so linear, not so separate, not so scientific, but realize that science and spirit are actually operating off the same system. Even now, a lot of the yogis have said these things. The Tibetan monks have said these things for centuries, and science didn't approve or acknowledge it. And now they're finding with the new quantum physics, a lot of the things are true.
Now, we've talked about where you came from and some of what you've gone through. For the benefit of our viewing audience that are writers and are wanting to know about the what, who, where, when, why, and how that I mentioned earlier, when did you start writing? Was that after you came back, or before, or while you were there, or what?
The book that I wrote, Are You Too Emotional? Are You Emotional Enough? I wrote that before I went into the Sangoma training.
And that's this book.
Right. And it's very scientifically based. I was very paranoid about being seen as airy-fairy and woo-woo and too much on the other side. So I've had people bring the book back to me and say, well, it's not spiritual enough. And I, what can you do? You've already written the book. Mm-hmm. But now, with the knowledge that I have and the research I've done, the new book that I'm writing called Stress Ace Yoga, Yoga for the 21st Century in the Western Mind, is scientifically based, but it's also spiritually based. So it's kind of my opus, I guess you could say.
Well, this could be the more scientific approach, and then your classes and your personal contact and your teaching and ongoing support material includes the more spiritual base. Now, let's talk about you. This is not your only book.
No,
this was just what you started with.
That's what I started with
before
yes.
you.
And I've also written 5 student manuals for the courses that I teach as well.
Well, you wrote Mist of the Ancestors. What is that about?
Mist of the Ancestors is about my journey into the African healing tradition and what that was like on a day-to-day basis. It's a photo journal as well as my day-to-day experiences with the other, what they call Twasanas. Twasana means rebirth or reborn. My brothers and sisters. And my interaction with the Babas and the Mamas and the journey that I took there.
And Energy
Anatomy
Coloring Book. Tell us
yes.
about that one.
Yes.
Is that for children?
No. There's a book that's already out on the market called Anatomy Coloring Book. So on the more energetic level, I've taken that model and made it spiritual or energetic anatomy. In other words, we have energy vortexes in our body. We have what we call meridians. These have been proven by injecting radioactive materials into people and watching them go through the body. We have our nervous system, our cardiovascular system, our digestive system. So each one of these bodies or anatomy, pieces of anatomy, have colors and they have energy. So they're subtle. It's a subtle energy anatomy coloring book.
Now they vibrate, as I understand it, the different parts of the body. For instance, the stomach and the heart and the brain all vibrate at a different rate. Is that something you found to be true, or something you're familiar?
They're all made to vibrate at the same frequency, but what happens is we get stress in our systems. In other words, when you get scared, your belly tightens up.
Mm-hmm.
So that starts vibrating at a different frequency. So there's 3 main energy systems that we work with in stress ACE yoga. That's the cranial, the base brain, your solar plexus, and then the base, they're called nervous plexus. I try not to use Sanskrit terms. I try to use language that people in the West can understand. So these are actually large nerve plexus that translates into energy around our body.
And then there's, are you dreaming your life, or is your life dreaming you?
Right. Are you dreaming your life, or is your life dreaming you? It's taken off a similar context of are you too emotional, or are you emotional enough? And that takes, that's about my life in Africa and the situations and experiences I had there to help people realize, I mean, we here in the West think we're in control and we know everything and all that, but there's a lot going on that influences us from many different dimensions and sources, but that's a whole nother topic, and that's what that book is about.
And spirit animals of Africa. Now, we have quite a bit of material out there on spirit animals in the Native American origins, but how's it different with the African?
Yes, well, Africa was kind of like the cradle of mankind. We all came from Africa. There's a DNA test that you can get from National Geographic. They take a swab of your saliva and they can run tests on it, and they can tell genetically where you originated from the original humans. And I've had that done. And my original ancestors came from Ethiopia. And they migrated up.
All parts of Africa is where they're coming from when they do this, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so my ancestors came up through the central steppes of Mongolia and then straight up to the north. I have a friend that did it as well, and his ancestors went over to Russia. Another friend, they went up to Sweden and that area. So I'm getting off topic a little bit here now, but the spirit animals of Africa have to do with our origins as a species, of how we have evolved, and our skin colors have changed, our languages have changed through environment. And so when these spirit animals come to us that are from Africa, they were the original animals on the planet that evolved through time into...
So they might even be animals we're not familiar with. We don't even know.
Yes, that's right. For instance, there have been archaeological finds that a bear and a cat are related, if that makes any sense. But that's an whole nother topic.
You get into that in that book? Or?
Not too much, but it's more of a fun book. It's a book and cards, And you can
cards.
kind of get it's a self-discovery journey, working, for instance, like with the lion, the king of beasts. He has a strong heart. He lives in a family, pride of lions, and so how that might relate to your life, that sort of thing.
Now, tell us about the new book, the one that's coming down the pike.
Yes,
Stress Ace Yoga, which you just mentioned, Yoga for the 21st Century and the Western Mind.
Yes, I'm very excited about this book because one of my friends that lives in Australia, her name is Anka Ramsden. She was one of my students in South Africa when I was teaching my workshops down there. And she took my material from Are You Too Emotional and she's expanded on it. And she came up with, she's a child psychologist, and so she's been able to take the information that I had originally come up with and expanded on it to where she's realized, and the field has realized, different parts of the field of psychology has realized, that when we're born, we are born with survival reflexes. These survival reflexes, if they are inhibited at our birth or in our growth stages, get stuck. For instance, there's the Moro reflex, they call it. The Moro reflex is when a baby is on its stomach and it goes to learn to turn over or to come up on its hands and knees and learn to crawl. If that's inhibited some way with either interference or the startle reflex, it can affect a person the rest of their life. So this Stress Ace Yoga, we take these reflexes and we re-educate them to where they operate smoothly. One of the first reflexes a baby has is a startle reflex. So children that are in the crib and there's a loud sound or something, they will jump. And that's even before the eyes kick in, because most little babies, they can't see very well anyway. But the sound reflex is huge. And so if there was startle or sounds or yelling, or maybe the baby was crying for a reason and the parents didn't know what it was, that can be interfered with. And then a child's hearing can then be thwarted.
Tell me, for the benefit of the viewers, what was your biggest problem in writing? What did you, was it discipline, or, what was it? What was your main thing that you had to overcome in writing your books?
My freeze reflex. I would just have these wonderful ideas and procrastination and being frozen. Since I have learned about the nervous system and Stress Ace Yoga, I'm now moving forward again. I actually went dormant for quite a while, quite a number of years. I came back to the States in 2007, and I tried to do the work here, but I could not. I was just frozen. So procrastination, feeling afraid to write, being scared to write, feeling judged.
Not wanting to be exposed.
A lot of us suffer from those kinds of things. And I think one of the reasons I felt so free in other cultures is no one knew me, and it made no difference to me if I was judged or not, because they didn't have the same reference points I had. Now that I've learned Stress Ace Yoga and I'm now teaching it, all that is going away.
That's another thing I want to get to there is your classes. But I've talked about it on the show before. I was just writing, and I had 700 or 800 pages, single space with no title, before I woke up to the fact and started breaking them out into books.
Yes.
So everybody has different crosses to bear when it comes to writing it, and I know that a lot of you out there may be having some difficulty with one area or one stage of your writing or another, but it's interesting to hear that here's somebody who has 5 books, and she still deals with it, and you will have to deal with it too. What about your classes? Tell us about them.
Well, right now I'm teaching stress-based yoga in my yoga classes, and I have classes on Wednesdays and Saturdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays. So people can come to yoga and they don't have to go through psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is good for a certain stage of your life, but they don't have to. They can actually unwind their nervous system by doing this yoga.
So they can deal with that baggage.
Right. You can be your own psychologist, your own doctor, your own whatever by doing this type of yoga, and you'll find your life and your attitudes really shifting.
These are our classes?
Our classes, yes.
And you have grade levels?
We have basic when you start out, which takes you to a certain level of a release. Then we have intermediate, and then we'll have advanced. In the basic, we don't get into the emotions too much. We just get into the nervous system relaxing and releasing. So the way the fight, flight, or freeze works, our first line of defense is fight, which is anger. The second line of defense is running away, which is fear. And the third line of defense is being just frozen, and that's the very last thing we address.
But isn't anger and all of it sourced from fear? Isn't fear what's causing the anger, and isn't fear what's causing the freeze and the flight?
I don't know how to answer that. I do know that animals, when they're in the wild and a predator comes around, if the predator's not too big, it'll fight it. Mm-hmm. If the predator's bigger than them, they're gonna run away.
Yeah.
And if they can't run, they'll freeze up like a possum or a deer, like deer in the headlights. You've had that thing. So
and that's just when they don't know what to do.
And they don't know what to do. So we equate anger with fighting, and we equate fear with running away. So our basal brain, or our primal brain, operates like that.
That's why I asked that, because I equate all three, freezing, fighting, or fleeing, as having its origin in fear.
Could be.
And I'm not, so that's why I asked that question.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. It's just, in my experience of unwinding that base brain, the nervous system, anger starts coming up first, and then we look in fear, and then that frozen part.
But if one's fears are dealt with, then anger dissipates, and there's no desire to run, and we're not frozen. That's the way I was thinking about it.
Okay.
I'm wondering. Wondering how you saw it.
It doesn't operate linearly, in a linear fashion, because you can go from anger and you can go to fear, and and it's probably all one thing, like you're saying. But to be able to talk about it, we have to have some
subdivide it a little bit so you can deal with it.
Some way so people can understand what we're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we have a couple of minutes left. I wonder if you have a message or anything that you would like to tell our viewing audience.
Yes, I do. It's really exciting, and I'm so very excited to share this with you, is that we no longer have to be stressed. There are ways and tools now that you can use yourself to make your life a higher quality, more loving, and feel that you belong and can operate in the world that's productive. That's really clear to me, and I've spent most of my life searching for these answers, and I'm so happy to be here to be able to say this. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Elle, for being with us today, and I think it was very informative and on a wide range. Very few people have spent this amount of time in Africa and have gone through this type of pathway, so I appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, Jim.
I want to thank all of you for being with us today on the Bookman Show, and we look forward to being back next week. Have a good evening.